Surface, I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is a podcast about decolonizing design. On today's episode, I am joined by the designer, educator, and researcher Danah Abdulla. Danah is currently a senior lecturer in communication design at Brunel University in London. She is also the founder of Kalimat, a nonprofit magazine about Arab thought and culture, and is a founding member of the Decolonizing Design platform. Danah originally studied communications, but went on to get her MA in social design from the Maryland Institute College of Art and a PhD titled Design Otherwise towards a locally centric design education curricula in Jordan at Goldsmiths University in London. And obviously, I was really interested in talking to her about all of this. I was really curious about her background and this evolution of her career. And I was especially excited to talk to her about both this idea of locally centered design education and what that means, and what it means to decolonize design and how we can actually go about doing that. This was such a fascinating conversation on everything from teaching philosophies to breaking down the barriers between design disciplines to the role of the designer as citizen. I'm so excited to share this one with you. Remember, if you're a fan of the podcast and want to help support it, you can become a member for $5 a month or $50 a year. Members get an exclusive monthly newsletter that features behind-the-scenes content, links, and articles from former guests about design and writing and criticism and everything that we talk about on the show. Scratching the Surface is fully supported through these memberships, so if you'd like to help with the ongoing production of the podcast, I hope you consider joining. Thank you, as always, for listening, and enjoy this conversation with me and Danah Abdulla. I'd like to start by talking about your background and just the general trajectory of your career, because I find it interesting and simultaneously very logical, and also not logical, illogical a little bit of the directions that you've taken. And so I'd like to kind of talk about how your work has evolved. So you originally studied communications in undergrad, right?
Yeah.
You're 18, 19. What were you interested at the time? Why communications? Where did you see yourself going then?
This is a very interesting question, I think, because when you're 18, 19, well, I was 18. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And also because I was limited by the choices that my Arab parents wanted me to pursue, which were business or engineering, possibly medicine or law, after you get a degree. So maybe something sciencey, which didn't fit me at all. I went to an art high school. And so that visual arts was always part of what I did. I was always drawing. I was always doing, things that you expect designers to do, right? My sister had studied fashion design, so the idea of design was around in terms of it was very present in my upbringing.
Right.
I enrolled into business and did not like it because it was money and maintaining the status quo.
Right.
Those were not things I enjoyed. And so I started actually, I guess when you're applying to university, there's no real prep in high school for you to go into university in terms of what are the options available to you. And perhaps for some places that's a bit different. But for me, I definitely don't remember having those conversations with any of my teachers, or, you just went somewhere. Very few kids really knew what they were good at and just kind of went and pursued that. And so when I was doing business and doing very badly in business, I started looking at what kind of the prospectus, this is where your first engagement with graphic design is. A graphic designer has put together this prospectus and told you, here are the courses available in this university, and you start reading them. And I said, okay, well, I like this. This is really interesting, because communications is media studies. It's got all the theory bits. It's got the practical bits. So you work on video, you work on radio. You're doing the great thing called Adobe Flash at the time.
Yes.
And, so it was like, oh, cool. I can do all of these things, and I want to do all of these things. And so that's why I switched over without having to lose the credits, because I was able to get a minor. Still very terrible at business, just in case anybody wants to. Yeah, so that's basically how I got to study communications, and it was a great degree to have because it really was the theoretical bit was there. It was rigorous. I got to know not only how to write, but also how to make things. So dealing with moving image,
Hmm.
learned Flash, again, completely obsolete the moment you graduate,
Yes.
and then started delving into design by the different kind of internships and people that I was working with. So that's how I realized, oh, this is the area I want to go into.
You mentioned that studying communications, you were able to get the kind of practical side, but also the theoretical side, and that was something that you were really interested in. And so, what was it about the theory side that interested you, and then what was it about the kind of practical side that interested you at that time? Was graphic design the thing that you wanted to do? Were you more interested in the ideas around these things? What was it that excited you, once you kind of got into that program?
I mean, if I could, this was, well, when did this was like 2005. So this was quite a while ago. Um, I think in terms of the theory, what excited me about it was just reading what different types of people were saying about
Mm-hmm.
certain subjects, and engaging with those and trying to formulate my own opinion, which as an undergrad, you're still sort of, at a
Yeah,
not the
yeah.
latest stage, with it, but it was still there. It was like, okay, you're reading this, trying to understand this text, and trying to deconstruct this language, some of the academic jargon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was also how these ideas can be put into like actionable, practical ways. In terms of, was I interested in graphic design specifically? No, not necessarily. I think I was interested around design in general, and I still am very. I mean, I love graphic design, but I'm interested always in design in general because a big
Yeah,
part of the work that I do is about abolishing disciplinary
yeah,
boundaries.
yeah, yeah.
They're quite limiting, um, and so yeah, it was working with a modeling agency. We were producing events, and then those events had to have publications, they had to have brand, they had to have a brand, they had to have a name, and all of these things interested me
Mm-hmm.
because I felt how they affected people, how people reacted to them. And so that was my what I wanted to do was I wanted to work on big ad campaigns because I thought some ad campaigns were so incredibly funny and just clever, and
Mm.
they mix in the art direction with the copy. I was much more into writing than being a full on art director because I guess with communications you're sort of a better writer than you are a practitioner at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I knew how to do a lot of the other things because of being in high school and just engaging in visual arts and stuff like that, and photography and moving image was basically things that we did a lot on the course.
Right.
So these things were all extremely interesting to me, and so I thought I wanted to work in advertising because you can it was just you can work on anything and you work with such different clients, and that's why I wanted to pursue advertising, which after going into advertising I realized is definitely not for me, but I did learn a lot from it, and I am very thankful for those very few short years I spent there.
So you finish your undergrad and you go into advertising, and you were in advertising for a couple years, and then was it after that that you then went to MICA to study social design?
Yeah, so basically what happened was I graduated 2008 when Lehman Brothers fell. So,
Mm-hmm.
any job in marketing and advertising was basically, if you
Yeah,
found one, wow, right? Because
yeah.
it was quite the struggle, and like you took whatever you could get. I think my salary was something appalling. What I did was when working in advertising, I sort of felt unfulfilled in terms of the activist part of my life. That was something I grew up with. I am
Mm.
Palestinian, and so it's a big part of my upbringing. It's a big part of who I am, um, and this idea of challenging the status quo. And so I decided to just quit my job at DDB, which is a very large advertising agency, and went to Palestine for about a month, and then traveled around. And that's when I started engaging with people who had these incredibly great stories to tell, but didn't have the language or the platform to tell them in the English language in particular. Because if you think of Palestine, the Arab world, most of the stories are told by foreigners, foreign journalists, foreigners living there, in the English language. And so I wanted to think. I want to think about a platform. What does that mean? What does it do? And so then I started working on my magazine, which is called Kalimat, which means words. And that was in summer of 2010. Then I had come back, started working on it, got a job at some digital agency for a little bit while working on this after work. And I launched it, and then I realized, okay, wait. I want to pursue more schooling because I just
Yeah.
want to engage with research again, and have the space to make something, like where I didn't have to worry about work and have the resources just to kind of make something.
Hmm.
So I was looking for different courses. Again, I was still thinking within the media studies scope, but I was also looking at graphic design. I was also looking at different programs based on their description in terms of like what kind of projects am I going to be working on? Because I didn't just want to work on I didn't want a studio practice type of program. That wasn't
Hmm.
my interest. Um, Looking at the faculty, just kind of researching everything. And then I was on Core 77, that website.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And this advert for Micah MA Social Design first class pops up. I was like, this looks
Yeah.
interesting.
Nice.
I click. It tells you advertising works. Uh, so I click on it and just start reading it. And I thought, wow, this is actually exactly what I want to do.
Mm.
Um, and then I think I either applied or I emailed Mike Weichert, and that was it. No, actually, that wasn't it. That I got into the new school as well in the media
Oh,
studies
yeah.
program,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I was sort of toying between: do I go to the new school? Do I go to Micah? And I remember going down to Baltimore, and I'm sorry, not the loveliest city, but coming
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
Canada, it was sort of a bit like, oh my god, what is this place, right?
Yep.
And
I know exactly what you mean.
the extravagant tuition that America has, of course, and just
Hmm.
arriving in Baltimore. And I remember Ryan Clifford and Mike Weichert taking me out to this Afghani restaurant and saying, "We want you to be on this course." And I thought, okay, this is great. I went to the new school; they were nice enough, but it was just completely. It was a bit disconnected.
Yeah.
I really loved that community aspect of Micah. It was small. It was just great. And so I thought, okay, you're taking a risk by going into a program that it's in its first year. So yeah, I decided to go to Micah, and I guess it led me to where I am today when I think about it.
I know exactly what you mean when you talk about kind of why you picked Micah. That was the same experience for me when I went to Micah. There was that kind of community aspect. I agree with you about Baltimore. And I thought, this is a great city for me to study in.
Yeah,
Uh, and that's it. And I know exactly what Afghani restaurant you're talking about.
everyone.
I have been there many times.
Yeah,
um, and I think there's something really interesting about choosing not just Micah over the new school, but choosing social design over the kind of media studies. And I don't know much about the new school's media studies program. I had Shannon Mattern on the podcast, who's someone who's a writer that I just love, and she teaches in that program.
yeah,
But there's something to me about social design, going back to the earlier discussion about the kind of theory versus the practice, where social design to me seems much more like you can do things with it, especially talking about that activism interest and background that you had, where
yeah.
where media seems much more theoretical. Was that your experience also?
I think that what attracted me about the New School Parsons program was the fact that you could create it was your thesis could be a project, so you could
Mm.
create a film, and I was looking at making a film more than anything, a film, a documentary, kind of in that
Oh,
domain.
interesting.
That was kind of the direction that I wanted to go into. Um, and it's tying that into publishing somehow because I had the
Right.
magazine. But I don't I think it really depends on the school you go to in terms of what you learn in a media studies or communications program.
Yeah. 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 So what was your experience at Micah like? And in that social design program that was the first class, did that, I mean, you said this has kind of set you up for all the work you've done since. Did that kind of give you the thing you were looking for, or the thing that maybe you thought you were looking for, or how did you get into Baltimore? What happens?
Oh God. I get into Baltimore, and we were, I think, so remember this MA social design program was in its first year at that
Right.
point. Still, now working in academia, I can really understand the first year of anything, how difficult it is. And what are we trying to do? Something completely different within an art and design institution that teaches art and design in a very traditional way.
Hmm.
And you have people who come in, what are their expectations? But you have people who are coming in who are not from design, who are from anthropology, who are from who
Mm,
who've never been through the design process, you know,
right.
uh, and uh, so they. I guess what of course any expectation that you have is not going to be exactly what happens when you get there. I think for me, um, Baltimore was difficult because we were at Micah Place, which was near Johns Hopkins Hospital, and that
Right.
area at that point basically almost abandoned. Well, it wasn't abandoned; they had razed through it and kicked the community out.
Right.
And so you felt like well, we didn't belong in that community. We were really outsiders. We weren't
Yeah.
connected to the community in any way. We were behind this fortress of a structure. And but don't get me wrong, we had a blast at Micah Place. I mean, the amount of parties that we did there, the graduate community at Micah was just. I mean, some amazing friends that I'm still in touch with. Um, that we lived there, we had our studios there, we had our classes there. It was a bit disconnected from the main Micah campus, and I think
Mm,
that most people had no idea what Mike was trying to do with the program. They didn't really know. He had the center, and they kind of understood that, but I don't think they really knew what the MA social design was trying to do. And I think now, many years later, they really have a grasp on what they're doing, and they're really connected with the community. And you know,
yeah.
working
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
Mike is such a pleasure because he's so passionate and he's just extremely. He's a happy guy he's so excited about design, and he's just an absolute delight to be around.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, that was it. I guess what I did was it wasn't the experience I wanted, but I took what I needed from it, and I got the support in order to. I mean, what I was trying to research at that point, I realized was much bigger than a 1 year, even less than that, MA at Micah. It was
Mm.
a larger project.
And then is that and not to try to like connect things too linearly, but then is that how the PhD started? Was that kind of continuation of research that you started at Micah?
Yeah, it was. It definitely evolved into something in a different, much more structured and not structured, but much more kind of focused on one specific area rather than trying to do everything, which is what you realize you can't do a PhD on absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So
So, yeah.
so wait, so how long after Micah did you then start the PhD?
I graduated from Micah in May and I started my PhD in September.
Okay,
So
so
I
same
was,
year
yeah.
you went right into it.
Yeah,
And
so I think it was more something I had brought up to Mike, and at the time, I think he was Dean Gunalan Nadarajan. Guna, he was the dean, I think, of
mm, mm,
the art and design department, and they were both extremely supportive and thought that this was actually a very good direction for me to go into. And I applied to the UK because this was one of the only places you could do a practice-based PhD,
right,
whereas the US and Canada were very much about the MFA as sort of a terminal degree, but it was
right,
an MFA is much more about your studio practice versus what the UK was offering and what the PhD would be.
right. And
So yeah, it was quite quickly after I moved out of Baltimore, went to New York for a couple of months, went back to Canada, and then moved with three bags to London.
I love it. So
Yeah.
and your PhD was around design education, right? So where did the interest in education and teaching come in?
It was always part of the publishing practice in terms of what Kalimat was its initial mission was to be a visual communication tool that empowers and educates people.
Mm,
And so I was, while at Micah, looking into, um, you know, what is the educational system within the Arab region in teaching design,
right,
and how is that tied to the local context? But I was also interested in ideas in terms of the different types of aesthetics that were being promoted through this uh, through you know standards set by so-called universal design, and it
right.
really moved into looking at design education in Jordan specifically, so one specific context. So yeah, it was always part of it. Education was always something I was very interested in. Pedagogy is always something I was very interested in, because I do think that design is largely an educational tool.
Yeah, I have so many questions around around that. We could spend the rest of this conversation talking about education. That's primarily where my practice has moved to, and it's what I think about all the time. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because what I had read of your PhD that you had online about these ideas around kind of locally centric education and kind of student led is something that I've been thinking about a lot. In that when I studied design, um, it was a very Western European model. Design history was kind of rooted in that kind of modernist principles. And as a teacher now, I'm trying to not do that,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to teach uh, in, by showing wider ranges of work, by kind of dismantling a lot of this myth of design history that we're kind of taught. And I'm wondering, you've now spent years thinking about this. Can you talk about what you mean by locally centric design education and how this has then influenced your work as a teacher?
Yeah. Uh, I think for me, what I noticed about a lot of the design schools in the Arab world is that they were basically copy pasting structures from North American and European programs,
Mm-hmm.
and this is because of a different history of design that evolved in that region. I mean, remember, you don't really have something called industrial design. There is no real industry for producing that. And unfortunately, the crafts practices that they've had in Western design, crafts is seen as just crafts. It's not seen as design, right?
Oh,
So there
right.
was that issue. So a lot of the programs were, you'd see a lot of interior design programs, a lot of graphic design programs, very few fashion and very few product or industrial design programs. A lot of architecture, but I wasn't looking at architecture because it follows very different standards and it's much more, it's what you call a sort of major profession. So there's regulations on them, whereas
Right.
design has very diverse curricula and is not necessarily accredited by a certain board and so on. And nor should it be, you know.
Right.
So what I meant by locally centered designs, what I noticed was a lot of the content and a lot of the ways of teaching was disconnected from the student reality. At the same time, it wasn't, because what I argue is that it actually emulates the structure of the state, which
Mm.
is very much, this is the authority, I am the teacher, and you are the student, and you listen, and you do not talk back to me, you do not have an opinion, etc.
Right.
Uh, but also in terms of what they were learning, whether it was history, it was also the language that they were learning in, it was also what they were producing, were just completely disconnected from uh, the world around them. And we could say that about many other design programs as well. I think that a lot of students come in and we teach them in a very, we teach them like
Yeah.
it's the Bible, right? Do
Yeah.
this, do this, do that. Is it connected to my local area? Not likely. Um, so that was what I was looking to explore, and I wanted to explore that with the people who had uh, so students, designers, and design educators, because they're the ones who are in it, right? It wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to, curriculum is done by a specialist who has no idea what design is, and they just approve for quality, and they think you're just another department. They don't realize that you have different teaching needs, you have different timetabling needs, you have, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was largely what I was exploring. I'm sorry, I don't know if I've deviated from your question, but in terms of locally centric, it was how is it tied to my milieu, and how do I bring in, the places, the environments that shape me
Right.
into this teaching, into my design education experience. And so when you say student led, it really is about making them part of that, to make a classroom like a community, as Bell Hooks has stated.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of more or less a summary of the mammoth research.
Yeah. I love that. I'm sorry if this is just me asking for teaching advice now. This resonates with me so much. This is like exactly how I'm trying to operate in the classroom, and I am on board with everything that you're saying. And this has come up on the podcast before, and I've asked a bunch of educators this because this is clearly something I'm wrestling with is um, how does that change your position as a teacher, and when you then are in the classroom as a critic, as this is not the right word, but I can't think of a better word, evaluator. How do you engage with the students and the students' work when they're all coming from different backgrounds and bringing different things? You can't go back to the Bauhaus model of like, yes, this is good, no, this is bad,
Yeah.
etc. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. And I think that's, I think that a big part of the research was, when you say locally centric, oh, are you developing a model just for Jordan? No, no, no. Every university is based in a different space
Right.
and they need to consider that. So you need to teach it differently based on that space and test it out and see what works for you in the location that you're in. And I think that when you think of student led education, it's also a learning experience for you as an educator because how do you handle different ways of learning in the classroom as well,
Mm,
right? Because that's another thing. It's not only what they're bringing; it's how they learn. If I just kind of blanket some one way of teaching a student something, they're not going to engage with the content. They're going to be completely disconnected. Now, granted, we have huge student numbers, and that's more and more difficult. But that's the beauty of the studio.
right.
And I think that the Bauhaus has done some wonderful things. It has given us these great blueprints, let's say. But I think there's just I don't know how to really answer this question because it's so personal based on how you engage with your own classroom
Yeah.
and what happens at
I'm
that specific moment. And that's the great part about being an educator is that you never have the same day twice.
right. I guess my question is, and maybe this is a false binary now, kind of hearing you talk about this, but something that I think about a lot as a white male professor in New York City who's teaching predominantly international students,
Mhm.
um, who are expecting a grade. And if I say, this is student led, I want you all to bring your experiences into the classroom. Um, I don't I don't know how to phrase it. When I think about giving grades or when I think about evaluating, we're in a critique setting talking about it. Um, how do you say something is right or wrong or good or bad? Can you even do that anymore? You know what I'm you know what I'm asking?
I, I mean, I try to frame it in terms of a conversation. Again,
Hmm.
we're not going to abolish everything right away, right? And there's some great things about how design has been practiced, and I love the grid, and I
Yeah.
students don't learn the grid and learn how to use it. I think that's a big shame when people say, I want to break it now. No, no, you need to understand it, understand these tools first,
Yeah.
and then show me how you can evolve from it.
Right. Right. Right.
So in terms of, I don't want to frame it in right or wrong and that's a very sort of other disciplines do that where it's like, oh, there's either a right or wrong answer. And with design, you don't have that.
Right.
There's how the student is able to articulate the reasons behind their decisions.
Right. Right.
So
Exactly.
how they express why they chose this color, why they chose this subject, why they chose to work with this particular group, and to justify it. So, give me the reasons. How is this challenging you? And
Mm.
I think that's more important to me that students are able to articulate these ideas without being defensive, which is very difficult.
Right. Right.
And that's okay, great, check mark. I may not like the work aesthetically, no, it's subjective, but I wouldn't mark it down if that student gave the reasoning that even kind of goes against what I believe in. I don't, it's
Yeah. 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 That
yeah.
makes sense. How has this changed that experience, whether working on the PhD and then also as being a teacher? How has this changed your own design work or your own approach to being a designer?
Uh, I don't think I've made a piece of work in a long
Okay.
time,
Okay.
honestly, because I'm so busy with the academic world.
Hmm.
I think the last thing I designed was the PhD, which actually had to be in very strict University of London confines.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Bind it in hardcover blue with gold letters on the side,
I see.
one-sided page with these certain margins, and you were like, "Oh God!"
Right,
And you can only use the appendices if you wanted to pull out. Um,
right.
but has it changed? I don't know if I can really. I guess it's changed my teaching practice, where I'm constantly reflecting. I'm constantly sort of thinking about all the briefs I give them, and because that's kind of the work that you do now.
Right.
When you're a
Yeah.
full-time academic, your main job is being a full-time academic, and the the things that I make is these briefs that I give them,
Right.
and
Right.
the activities that we do in the classroom. And it has made me reflect a lot on what I put and what language I use in it, what readings I give them, um, what I show them in terms of examples. I definitely think it has definitely changed how I do that and how I run the class, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we're having this conversation at a really interesting time actually, because I'm doing the same thing. I'm right in the middle of rewriting all of the syllabi and projects for my classes for the fall, and have been thinking about all of these things you're talking about and how to kind of talk about them in class and write about them, and imagining the critique settings, which is kind of why I'm asking you these questions. Let me ask the previous question in a different way, and perhaps this can lead into decolonizing design a little bit. I'm curious how these ideas that we're talking about maybe don't necessarily change how you think about your own work, but how you think about design in general. And you mentioned earlier about you see kind of part of your work as dismantling these definitions between them. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think ever since I think since August, I've been at Brunel University, and Brunel is a product and industrial design program.
Mm.
So I teach communication design, graphic design to product and industrial design
Oh,
students.
interesting.
Yeah, so it's a very different. We're also in a college of engineering, and so where you are placed in a university, and you're also within a larger university that sees you as just another department. It's a very different experience than being where I usually am comfortable is the art and design,
Right, right.
design space. Um, so I see pros and cons to both, and but it's taught me, I think, in terms of one, the design process is similar whichever discipline you're in.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's almost, I don't want to say steps, but you literally do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you think the same way, you're taught to think the same way. Um, it's a different engagement with. I think for me has been really interesting, and my knowledge of materials has just gone through the roof.
Mm.
Dealing with plastics and metals and all these things, and being and having these great facilities where the students are making this, and their understanding of it has been quite a nice learning experience for me. And I think and then me being able to teach them about paper and what they can do with paper.
Right.
I think students are always amazed at how if you use 700-gram paper, you can make a lamp.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? Yeah, this
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Paper is such a great material. And so that's been really interesting. The way of thinking where I see, okay, there's actually, we have a similar, we're all designers. We all think in a similar way. But why do we have these barriers between us where we don't actually know anything about each other, although there's so much room for us to work together
Right.
and complement each other's work? Um, for students in product and industrial design, I think there's a reputation for graphic design that and this is just so bad to say that it's just like a fluffy
Right.
kind of thing, which is really interesting because when you look at the history of graphic design, it's a very male practice,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
um, sort of like architecture. And you come into this space where already there's a sort of rift between engineers and designers,
Hmm.
and you have this rift between, okay, graphic and product design, industrial design. Uh, and then they realize that actually, after the class, saying, I never realized that graphic design actually affects the entire social world. Part of
Right.
it, you know,
Right.
and it has, and again, this is the thing, is that graphic designers don't realize how much they have to do with other design disciplines. You're on clothes, you're on products, you're on services, you're on all these. So why do we have these barriers? That's what is so interesting to me, because I think that we would be much more, perhaps I would say we'd be much more sensitive citizens
Mm.
if we understood every aspect of design, and then perhaps think of specialization at a later stage, or even none at all. I don't know. That's something I'm kind of toying with at the moment.
Can
Um,
could you talk
yeah.
could you talk more about that, about being more sensitive citizens? And something you mentioned earlier in the conversation I wanted to come back to is you didn't want to maintain the status quo, and you thought that design in some way could do that. And I think that that's connected to this idea of being sensitive citizens. Can you talk more about what you mean by that and how you think design can be a part of that?
Well, I think as designers, we create what we do. We make the world God did not make,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That's what design is. And whether we like it or not, whatever we make, even if we think is mundane, affects people's life. Bad signage, a bad dentistry tool,
Right.
frustrating interfaces. All of these things affect people, no matter how small they are, right? Because they engage with what we make. In terms of being a sensitive citizen, I think what we have is with design education, it makes you think very differently from others,
Hmm.
because you are basically trained to like observe and find the little details that no one notices.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And that makes you more sensitive and more observant. And when you're detail oriented, it's like it makes you more thoughtful. I guess to quote one quote I really love by Charles Eames is the designer must be the perfect dinner host. They must anticipate all of their guests' needs.
Right.
And that's really why I love design so much, and why I think that we have such a more power than we think we do,
Yeah.
because we can make someone's life extremely enjoyable. I mean, think about how when someone engages with a product and how much they love it and they just want to talk about it, and they're sort of like, actually, this has considered me. Yes, there is a human behind this, but then also, we consider the non-humans. Like when you observe, you're sitting down and you see how the squirrel jumps over the rubbish bin because that was a man-made thing, and how they sort of
Right.
start to engage with objects that are now in their space. Maybe the designer can think of ways they consider how the squirrel would use it. I know this is sounding like a very silly example,
No, I
but
know
this is
exactly
sort
what you mean.
of, right. You become more sensitive to humans and non-humans. Um, so yeah, but also in terms of the materials that you use, when you sort of add this, it's I don't know. There's just so many things that for me, the possibilities are endless. This attention to detail, this way of thinking of how I'm going to make it a bit more bearable for someone, or not even bearable, but like I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for. I think that there's a lot of design, unfortunately, is too quick to go out
Right.
and is very bad. And that's why you have another better rendition of something. Actually, it's just an extra feature.
Right.
And I try to get my students to not think of features, of not thinking of just product centric things, um, but of actually really break down this object. What is the problem with it? Uh,
Hmm.
maybe it's not even the, maybe it's not even just the product itself. It can be, I don't know. The issue can be a service. It can be some other observation that you've made that has nothing to do with the product. Just sort of these are the things that make design so interesting.
Right.
I'm thinking in a very sort of specific. I'm a graphic designer. I must create a printed output or a digital interface. I am a product designer. I must create a product, and that product must be a commercial product, right?
Right.
I am a fashion designer. I must create a garment that is put on the runway. That is also that has possibility for mass market. I'm an interior designer. I work on this specific aspect of interiors of apartments, and only this area here. I only work on commercial buildings or on
Right.
private apartments, things like that. So it's very very rigid.
Yeah, and I think that rigidity, I think you're exactly right, and I think the world just doesn't really even work like that anymore. And I think about you know that we can wear watches that have computers in them, that is fashion and product design, and there's typography on that, which is graphic design. It's all of these things,
Yeah.
And if we're too siloed like that, we're not going to get to something better. It is just going to be the quick, fast, let's add a new feature because we can solutions.
Yeah.
I want to connect this maybe to Decolonizing Design. And this is a site that you co-founded and has been kind of I guess you could kind of call it a movement. There's a lot of discussion around decolonizing design, what it means to decolonize design. Can you talk about, just for people that aren't familiar with it, both what decolonizing design the site is and what it means to decolonize design?
Ooh, I think that the second bit of the question is probably not going to be answerable
Okay.
in a short period of time.
Okay.
But I guess with the website, and perhaps I'm just going to be kind of regurgitating our own manifesto.
That's fine.
What we wrote when we created it was we really thought that there was no critical reflection on what the politics of design practice are,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and the stuff that designers create. Right? I think if you think of design, we always think it's very neutral. We don't think of what we do as political, and so we're actually making ourselves look completely meaningless, where we're just innocent people who make pretty things, and then we
Right.
argue against that. But we're the ones that are actually saying that, oh no, we don't do anything political, right?
Right.
So it's very um, but we also thought not only just in academic discourse but professional discourse, there really wasn't anything critical, and and it wasn't really addressing these longstanding systemic issues of power.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what types of knowledge that what is considered good design, that was something that we were constantly
Right.
trying to discuss amongst ourselves. What was this idea of universal design? Who dictates what is universal design? What is the role of crafts practices in other places in the world? Why is it that we're constantly reading the same figures in design history?
Right.
um, and even, I mean, for me, not I wouldn't for me personally, it was this idea of looking at the discourse around global design history. And global design history really meant anyone who writes in the English language about another place on Earth.
Right.
So this was,
Yeah.
you know, these were the questions that we were kind of grappling with. Um, and so we decided that there were people that were writing about this. It was not a mainstream design discourse, which is constantly dominated by the very Anglocentric, Eurocentric ways of seeing,
Mm-hmm.
knowing, and in the world. And there was just no attention to alternative discourses. And even with the global design history discussion, it was any educator that was likely, or sorry, any academic that was either living outside their home country and could write in English that was included. You weren't
Mm.
really including other languages. Um, and so we were like, well, why is there no space? And when we meant space, we're talking about conferences, we're talking about publications, all of these things. And so we thought, why don't we create the space and invite people to write about alternative discourses? Um, so to let people think of, to invite people to another way of thinking about the world, to think otherwise, to kind of other ways of seeing the world,
Right.
right?
Right.
Other ways of understanding the world and understanding the implications of design, um, that have brought to bear on sort of non-Western ways of thinking and being, and then how design is implicated in issues of class, race, gender, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so we wanted to highlight and put these ideas at the forefront. Um, yeah, I think that's kind of more or less why we think there's a big need for this platform. And interestingly, the moment we launched it, we realized how much people were so thankful for it
Yeah.
in terms of the space, and they were just tired of the same old design discourse.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to something you said very early on, and I've brought up a couple of times throughout, is this, you kind of having this desire to not maintain the status quo. And I think a lot of design discourse, and I think part of why I started this podcast also is I felt like the design discourse that was happening on sites like Fast Company was
Mm,
just, the stuff that designers were reading was just maintaining the status quo. It wasn't pushing
yeah.
anything forward. It wasn't asking any tough questions. We were seeing the same agencies, the same studios, the same designers again and again. The design discourse has kind of devolved, not all of it, but a lot of it had devolved into PR machines. Uh,
Yeah.
how does decolonizing that look to you? And you started answering that by kind of looking more globally, not as in global design, but kind of, hearing from a range of voices. What else can we do to help shape the discourse, or to decolonize design that's not being done now or that we need more of?
I mean, I think that there's the main thing that we always iterate is that our goal is not additive change. It's not, hey, let's sprinkle on a few other women
Right,
or a few
right.
people of color into the curriculum. No, no, no. It's fundamentally rethinking the way that you teach, what you teach,
Mhm.
how you teach, and challenging your own convictions. Really, I mean, when you think about how you understand the history of the world, and how you understand the history of design. Everybody always starts with in the Industrial
Right.
Revolution. So wait, there are other histories. There are, but there's also it's. I guess to summarize it, it really is radical systemic change.
Hmm.
It's not just. I think that a lot of you have this embrace of decolonizing design, of diversity and inclusivity, but inclusivity and diversity, it just feels like, okay, well, we're going to let you into the convo, but we're not going to it.
Right, right.
And that's what we don't want, right? We want something to, when you think of challenging the status quo, you think of really fundamentally restructuring things without kind of, we're not saying abolish everything that came before. No, 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 no. There are other ways of thinking and knowing in the world. There's people who talk about a world sense and decolonial theories who talk about a world sense. So
Mm,
people who see the world not through a worldview, but world sense. So other senses, for example.
right.
You've given so much attention to the viewpoint, right, in history, and we've kind of disregarded other ways of experiencing the world. The other thing is in terms of an example is sustainability theory.
Mm,
When we think about sustainability, we always think, oh, we need to be sustainable. This was like theory generated from the West. But a lot of it is just kind of stealing and co opting ideas from indigenous communities.
mm,
So it's time to really think about how these people also contribute to knowledge,
right.
right? Because they're often seen as, and this was something I tried to do with my thesis, is that I was interested in theorists who were, whether they were engaging with Marxist theory, but they were living in the Arab world, they were writing about the Arab world. I wasn't interested in using the same old European theorists to talk about the region that I was embedded in, right?
Right.
And why do we say that? Only only certain people write theory. Everybody else, it's just biased testimonial or whatnot.
Mm,
And that's kind of what we come across, and that's what we don't want. That's what it means to decolonize.
y-
I don't want to say just design because I think it's larger than that, but it is it's moving away from this idea that we live in a universal world,
right.
and for a pluriversal world, a world where many worlds fit,
Right.
basically. But also, when you think of the idea of the term decolonizing, every space has such a different history. So what that means is based again on the context that you're in. If you're speaking of decolonizing design in the UK, it's very different from speaking of decolonizing design in
Mm,
Canada or
mhm.
in the Arab world, for example. Right.
Yeah.
So for people in the Arab world, decolonizing design could mean removing English as the first language of them,
Right.
being taught design in English, and but not removing it completely, but putting Arabic at the forefront and still learning English and engaging with English,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
not forcing English to be the predominant language and them kind of not being able to articulate their ideas in their own mother tongue.
Right.
So those, again, I'm not, every, it's so different. The context is so important. And I think that that's what we generally as designers forget.
Right.
We forget about our role in I think it's because we're just. I guess it's not necessarily when you think of fast company and you think of these different sort of sources that designers go to. Um, it's so shallow. I mean, there's some random good stuff on there here and there, but it's just it doesn't really question design as just the service provider. Even when we talk about designers in leadership positions, what has that changed? Nothing. It's just actually made machines more clever, where you have what is it? One shop click on Amazon.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
read receipts. This is what we're good at as designers, right? We create these incredibly intrusive things. So imagine we put that power into something else.
Right. I loved that. And what I like about it is, admittedly, for me, when I think about decolonizing design, I even find myself thinking about it in a narrow context of kind of how we talk about design history. And that we need
Mm,
to, when I say decolonizing design, I kind of subconsciously limit it to decolonizing design history. And what I
yeah.
love about what you just said is that it's not just about showing a wider range of history or kind of dismantling a little bit of what we think of as that design history, but it's actually about rethinking. It's that systemic change that you're talking about how we actually talk about our work, and then also the work that we engage in and what we see as our role of as designers. And I
Mhm.
think that is so interesting. I think that's really where these ideas really could start to make a difference, or at least kind of start to change some things.
Yeah.
I have two more questions. And
Yeah.
these are two questions that I use to end all of these conversations. And this first one might be connected to what we were just talking about. What are the subjects or topics that you're thinking about right now? What's kind of next for you research wise? Where do you see your research and your time going forward?
Um, well, time is a myth. I have no time,
Right, of course. None
unfortunately.
of us do.
I think the first year in any job, you're always just committed to getting the modules that you're teaching off the ground, making sure that they're running properly and all
Yeah.
that. So I sort of research has taken a back seat, but I've been doing a lot of talks here and there. Some of which I think is going to evolve in larger, say, book chapters or journal
Mm.
articles. I'm very interested in reliving the trauma of my PhD and perhaps transforming that into a
Okay.
book,
Nice.
because I think it's very important for me that this piece of work is also translated into Arabic and
Mm.
looked at in terms of next steps, where, what do the participants take out of it? What do they do with it? Do they see it as, I didn't write it as a toolkit. That was something I wanted to move away
Right.
from. But there are kind of specific key things that came out. Do they take that and try and interpret that in the classroom? And what happens afterwards, right?
Yeah.
Evolving beyond, um, and so that's something I'm interested in exploring. For decolonizing design, we're heading to Porto
Mm.
Design Biennial in
Nice.
September, and so we're hosting a workshop there. And that's, there was always something that we're working on, and we're hoping that will develop into something bigger for us as well, for future projects. There's other things I'm interested in that really have nothing to do with my interest in design cultures in the Arab world
Mm.
and in decolonizing design. Um, there's, I'm super interested in understanding interfaces from a graphic designer's
Yeah.
perspective. Like, for example, as an academic, you're constantly using citation software, and it's like no one's ever employed a graphic designer before.
Yeah.
In
Yeah. Yeah.
understanding
Yeah.
what I'm also interested in, institutional software that you're forced to use as an academic as a form of control and
Oh, that's
managerialism.
so
These
interesting.
are weird things I'm interested in.
Yeah.
And then I'm also trying to push this, the border thinking in design. Border thinking is a decolonial theory concept, but that kind of abolishing of disciplinary disobedience,
Mm.
um, of disciplines within design, and then probably moving to other disciplines. So that's the area I'm really interested in now. And as always with design education, and reflecting on how I'm teaching my own teaching practice, and yeah, and that's kind of more or less what I'm interested in these days. Still very very interested in publishing. And actually, this is me thinking about one of your earlier questions in terms of how has the work you've done with students changed
Oh yeah, yeah.
the work that I think for me, it wasn't necessarily just students, but it was also being engaged in my research. Is that Kalimat was a publication that was it was a magazine, and it was a magazine created at a certain point in time. The world was a very different place, and that specific region, the Arab region, was a very different place at that point, and changed, shifted in 4 or 5 years. And so, is a magazine the appropriate medium to spread these ideas? And that's something I've been toying with. And then and to me, no. But I still want to stay within the realm of publishing. But what does that mean? And so these are the questions that I'm currently exploring. So,
That's great. My last question is probably also a big question. Who are the authors or the thinkers, or what are the books that have really shaped how you think about all of this that we've been talking about? Someone listens to this episode and they like all of the things you're talking about. Where else would you point them as people to read, or books to read, or resources to spend time with?
ooh, that's a very tough one, because I guess there's a difference between the things that have inspired me and the
Oh,
things that I would get people to. I guess it really depends on what when people ask for recommendations. What books would they read? Is
can we hear both? Can we hear your recommendations and your inspirations?
I guess I'm going to look at the inspirations that could also
Okay.
be as
Okay.
recommendations, and they're more
Okay.
generic. One of my favorite books is, of course, Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks, and Her Feminism is for Everybody is another one, because it's a very sort of, why is it? It's an important book because it's so accessible. And this is something we try to do with Decolonizing Design. We want to make this discourse accessible. We don't want it to just live within
Hmm.
academia. And it's sort of that little book that you can give to someone, and they're like, okay, I get what feminism is
Right.
now. It's not
Right.
what I grew up thinking. It's like anti-male, and this
Yeah.
discussion. It really is so accessible and so important, and that one has really shaped for me how I present these ideas to the students in the classroom.
Mm.
um, Another one that also is Living a Feminist Life by Sarah Ahmad is also a very important one. Um, in terms of looking at the Arab region, something that has encouraged me to look at different thinkers from the Arab region is Contemporary Arab Thought by Elizabeth Kassab.
Mm.
That book has, transformed my, not transformed, but kind of expanded my reading list for engaging with different Arab theorists. Anything written by, I wouldn't say anything written by, but a lot of the stuff written by Ramon Grosfoguel, who's
I don't.
a decolonial thinker, and Arturo Escobar. Arturo has written Designs for the
Mm.
Pluriverse, which is
Yeah.
very
Yeah. Yeah.
much a book directed at design overall. So that one is, I highly recommend that one, because it's such a great piece of work. He's just gone through. He just breaks down all these different ideas, um, yeah, and it's always interesting to see someone who's not a designer talk about design in that
Yeah.
way and see the importance of design. And it's definitely a book I recommend for those that are interested in the world of teaching. um, Academic Diary by Les Back, who's a professor at Goldsmiths in sociology, has really
Hmm.
influenced my relationship to teaching, my relationship to my students, my relationship to administrative staff.
Oh, I don't know that one.
um, Yeah, it's a really good one. It's published by Goldsmiths Press, and Les Back is just such an amazing educator, such an amazing academic.
Okay. I'm adding that to my
Um,
list right now.
yeah, I definitely recommend that one. I realize there isn't that many kind of design books that I would put in there, because that just shows you is sort of not
Yeah.
really.
No, I actually kind of like that, to be honest.
Because I think design is it's every single discipline influences design in
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
way. So it's um, yeah, I think for me those are the main books, I would say, at this. That I'm kind of trying to stick with what's been influencing me in the past couple of years.
I think that's great. I think that's a really good list, actually. Thank you so much for this conversation. This was so interesting to me. I feel like I learned a lot, and you actually just kind of personally gave me a lot to think about over the next couple of months as I kind of rewrite my syllabi also. So thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed this.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And it's been nice to kind of go back through memory lane.
Yeah, good. This episode was recorded on July 5th, 2019. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram @Surface Podcast. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.